can't believe it's already our season finale for the Classics series. Oh, it's been sort of a whirlwind in a way. And I'm so excited for the concerts this weekend for many, many reasons. Beautiful music, but also very special homecomings that we get to celebrate this weekend. We get to bring back two sort of native sons, if you will, and celebrate all of their achievements. We'll be hearing from them today, but our two wonderful guests, Robert Zimansky, the wonderful violinist, who's joining us again this weekend. The last time he performed with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra was nearly 30 years ago. Yes. And Jenkins, the young composer whose first orchestral piece will be premiered this weekend by the Symphony and that the orchestra commissioned him to write. Welcome to both of you. I want to take a moment to thank our concert sponsor, American Trust and Savings Bank. Nobody from American Trust could be here today. They're actually really busy with community outreach and being involved in volunteering. But I also want to thank all our guest artist sponsors, Tim and Christine Collin, who have been fantastic partners with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra. They were the first ever guest artist sponsors when we first came up with that idea, and we thank them for many years of support. Tim Collin is here today. Please join me in thanking Tim. A couple of other special guests. I just wanted to mention, you may recall that the Symphony sometimes does a really fun fundraiser called Pursuit of the Podium. And that has been going on for the last few months. And 5 local celebrities have been raising funds on behalf of the Symphony with the, well, yeah, celebrities. People well known, I should say. And the one raising the most funds for the Symphony gets to conduct one piece of with the orchestra at our free Arboretum concert on June 25th. And so I wanted to mention that one of their participants is here today. We're excited that Harriet Heitzman is one of our participants, and we'll thank you so much for being part of that. And the results of the Pursuit of the Podium, the winner, will be revealed this weekend, tomorrow night, and again on Sunday. So, very exciting times, yes. So, let's see, I wanted to mention also right off the bat that there's a special opportunity to hear more of Robert Zimansky at the library on Sunday evening. Starting at 5:30, we're going to have a more intimate kind of recital with Robert Zimansky and pianist Sharon Jensen performing the Grieg Sonata No. 3 for violin and piano. And there will be hors d'oeuvres, and that is a fundraiser for the Symphony. It is a little pricey. It is $50 per person, but if you could support the Symphony and come out, it promises to be a wonderful evening of music and also a chance to get to know Robert a little bit more as well. There will be hors d'oeuvres, as I said, and the choice of the library was specific and intentional because Robert's family, his mother's family, is a Lacey, which has specific ties, long-time ties with Dubuque and specifically the library. There's been a Lacey on the board of the Dubuque, the Carnegie Style Library, I think for over 50 years, and there's even the Lacey boardroom named for his mother's family. So that's, again, another nice homecoming, an opportunity to hear Robert perform up close in a more intimate setting than in the concert hall this weekend. And again, that's Sunday evening at 5:30. If you're interested, just call the Symphony office this afternoon, please. Thank you. Well, you know, this season we've been exploring ways that music, orchestral music, has been inspired by other art forms. And in a sense, today and this weekend, we're looking at ways that folk songs or folk tunes or folklore has inspired, quote, high art and orchestral music. We have folk melodies in the Scottish fantasy. We also have a local folk legend that inspired Derek Jenkins' beautiful piece, Matthias and the Storm. And then in Brahms' Third Symphony, also on the program this weekend, we have Brahms writing particularly in one of the middle movements in a very folk-like style. We're returning to some sort of simpler folk-like melodies. And so, of course, Brahms was often in his career inspired by folk melodies. One can think of his Hungarian dances, among others, too. So the concert will begin with a world premiere, and that's always exciting. This premiere is written by Derek and pretty fresh, I would say. I'm trying to think, you probably finished it maybe just a few months ago, I'm thinking. So that's always exciting. As it is always exciting to get to hear from a composer whose piece you're about to hear. You know, we don't get to do that with Brahms, unfortunately. Please join me in welcoming up Derek Jenkins, and we'll hear a little bit more about him and the piece. Welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Derek. You grew up right here in Dubuque, right? But you weren't born here. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was born actually in Germany, which I actually didn't learn German until I was in college. So I apologize if I try to speak it and it sounds terrible. But yeah, I was born on a military base and then lived in Iowa City for about 5 years. Then down in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is literally in the middle of nowhere. And apologies to anybody that's their hometown. And then moved here in 2nd grade. Went to St. Joseph the Worker and then Washington Junior High and then graduated from Hempstead High School before starting college. So
that's great. And now, where are you living now? And tell us a little bit about your journey as a composer. When was it that you thought that you wanted to be a composer? And did you play music in the schools here and in Dubuque as you were growing up here?
So currently I'm in Kansas City. I'm finishing up a doctorate in music composition. Will actually defend my dissertation, which just happens to be the piece that you will hear this weekend. So I would defend that on Monday. So literally leave the concert, drive down to Kansas City, show up in front of 5 of my professors, and hopefully they, like me enough to pass me. So that will be kind of a whirlwind there for a second, but.
Thank you for making the schedule work. It's this weekend.
Well, actually, that got scheduled after the concert was scheduled, and it was the one block of time that worked for all 5 professors. Imagine trying to get them all together. And I told my fiance Emily, I was like, "Oh yeah, I got my dissertation defense scheduled as May 1st," and she's like, "Why did you pick that day?" It's right after we're getting back from Dubuque. So. Yeah, so it'll be kind of a whirlwind trip, but it'll be great, hopefully, on Monday. But as far as becoming a composer, I, for years, was convinced I was going to do something with math and science. Just kind of always a love of mine. Studied calculus and physics and just loved all of it. And then the wrench in my system was a gentleman by the name of John Ulrich. Who got the Washington Junior High job and was at Hempstead. And he got that my 8th grade year. And
John was the conductor there.
He was the conductor there.
He's a very, very talented educator and conductor who quickly rose up the ranks here in Dubuque, going from, as you said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but quickly went from like an elementary school to a middle school to a high school to a college, and then he went off to even bigger things. And John and I are still in touch, and you probably are too. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's a great.
Inspiring teacher.
He's actually going to be one of the groomsmen at my wedding. So, but yeah, he challenged me once. I was kind of annoying him to tears. Every day would show up before class started and. Was learning piano and was playing Pachelbel's Canon in D over and over and over, like every day for months. And finally he's like, okay, now you need to do something with this. And so arranged it for saxophones and kind of enjoyed the process, but something was kind of itching at me. Like, I want to do something different. I want to try something different. And so I kind of decided then that I was going to be a composer without having actually written anything. So it was kind of a terrifying leap of faith there, but yeah, from there went, played in high school, played saxophone, bassoon, tried playing jazz flute once. That was a terrible idea. Marched euphonium. But
so you really were involved in these things.
Yeah, I tried show choir, but do have 2 left feet. I hide it well, but that was also kind of an interesting experience.
So you knew at this young age you wanted to be a composer. That is so interesting. There aren't too many people who know already, like in junior high or high school, that they want to be a composer. So then you had to get the training and everything. So did you go right to Kansas City? Is that where you did your undergrad and graduate work?
So I was at the University of Missouri, Kansas City for my undergrad. and originally started as a student performance major and a composition major, and quickly realized that between eating and practicing and sleeping and seeing friends and homework and composing, there just wasn't enough time in the day, so I ended up focusing more on the composition side. And from there, graduated in 2010, went down to Houston, ended up in like the space capital of the world, not being doing anything space related, but was at Rice University and did my master's there in composition. And then ended up, coming back to Kansas City, where I'm finishing on my doctorate in composition, and because I, like to punish myself, I guess, I'm doing a master's in musicology at the same time. So I defend my dissertation on Monday, and a week from today, defend the thesis. So it'll be a long week.
Wow. Let's see if you have any color in your hair left out. Yeah.
Oh, it is starting to go great already. So.
Oh, I did want to mention to folks here that they, I'm sure, are familiar with Rice University, a private college in Houston, but they may not realize the kind of profile it has in the music world at this time now, which is that now it's considered in our country one of the finest music schools that there is. It's incredible. It's a wonderful school, so congrats for having been there. That's great. Yeah. So, all right, so now tell us a little bit about some of your other works, some of the other compositions you've done, and you recently won a special prize for one of them. And then segue into telling us about Matthias and the Storm.
So a lot of music I've been writing recently has been for wind ensembles or concert bands, and kind of always been like a love of mine, growing up, in the Midwest and, attending school in the Midwest and Texas, where band programs, kind of flourishing in the schools. I've always had access to one. And so, wrote a couple pieces, really early on, and, as a doctoral student, was approached by one of the conductors at UMKC to write a piece for his group. And I realized, through my reading, on the side, that it was 50 years since the end of the Mercury project, NASA's first mission into space. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll fuse my love of band music and love of space into this piece. And so I wrote it for the group, and it kind of took off. It's kind of like a child almost. It kind of goes off and starts doing its own thing. And it's been kind of performed around the country, a lot of groups. Actually, tonight it'll be performed down in Houston. So it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it's great.
But that piece actually just won, as William alluded to, the American Prize in Composition. It's a annual composition or competition for all kinds of music making. They have community level, college level, professional level, performance-based composition. I think arts management is one in there. So. But yeah, that was kind of a nice surprise to get an email about that one day. But after that, worked on a big piece actually for John Ulrich's group. He's in Tennessee. Wrote a piece for his group that was premiered last April. Have done a piece for like the saxophone ensemble at UMKC. Was commissioned by the Music Teachers National Association and the Missouri Music Teachers Association for a set of art songs, which was a nice collaboration. I had a married couple friends, one's a pianist and one's a singer, and they really wanted to commission me to write a piece, but as grad students, none of us had any money, so but they wanted to pay me. And then this commission came along, and they're like, "We'll give you money, but you have to find the performers." And so it's kind of this perfect storm almost. And they had a friend that was a poet, and so we just kind of all collaborated together on this piece, and it was premiered back in November. And that was actually the last piece I finished right before Matthias and the Storm, which, let's see, we talked, I think, May of last year, and then I finished it, I think it was the end of April, end of February when I sent it to him.
Yes, just this past February.
Just this past February, so,
yeah.
I think the ink is probably still drying. But, yeah, it was I was trying to find something that fit with Brahms and Bruch. I mean, nothing like, Trial by Fire, your first orchestra piece, and you're paired with, two great masters of the orchestra. And so I was like, okay, well, I, gotta hopefully make it good. So I was trying to find some way, some kind of story, some kind of entry point for myself into this piece. Never written for orchestra before, and So it was like, okay, well, I consider myself, even though I wasn't born in Dubuque, I consider myself a native Dubuquer, and I was like, okay, it's for the Dubuque Symphony, it's my first orchestra piece, I really should bring in some kind of Dubuque aspect, to kind of tell some story about Dubuque. And I got thinking about various folklores and tales that I've heard in Dubuque, and one kept kind of popping back in my mind. It was this idea of Loris praying that no tornado would destroy Dubuque. And it's a story that I've heard as an elementary school kid, and all my friends in Dubuque have heard it. And it's got no basis in reality anywhere. Dubuque has been very fortunate, and knock on wood, has not been hit by a tornado. And so
We've had all sorts of other great weather.
Yeah.
But no tornadoes.
Yeah.
It's true. By the way, I asked my 4th and 6th grade sons, and they were like, yeah, I know that story. I was like, how did you learn that? I don't know. Everybody knows that.
So it was, I kept kind of coming back to this idea, and in my mind, I just kind of let my mind go wild, and I was imagining him threw a grappling hook up the bluff and was climbing up in his bishop robe, and shouting at the storm, and it's just torrential rain and then darkened clouds, and just kind of this mess. I mean, just the perfect storm happening, and here's Loris trying to climb up the bluff and shout at the storm, and then I just kind of had this image of the storm abides basically and just kind of starts to dissipate, and the sky clears up, and if you've ever been out at Eagle Point Park and you look over the river and the sun's coming up, I mean, just that perfect scenic image came to mind. And so the piece starts out in the torrent of the storm, and kind of getting tossed around, and everything's kind of flying around, and the string player's going nuts, and and then finally it opens up, and we get this kind of relaxing peace and this calm. So kind of depicting the triumph of Loris over the storm.
Right. So this piece really is in a long tradition of orchestral storms, and that should be noted because there have been so many famous ones. And it's great that tradition continues. Some of the famous storms one can think of are like Beethoven's Pastoral. You have the William Tell Overture, and there's so many examples. Heldenleben. There's just numerous storms that have been written into music. And one of the things that I find so impressive about this piece, Derek, is that given that history of orchestral storms and how they use the orchestra to create that sense of a storm. Oh, by the way, the Grand Canyon Suite is one of my favorites. Yours is unique. I think that you have your own way of conveying that. Your use of the orchestra is imaginative and creative and new. So I wanted to applaud you on that, because that's a little bit of a lot of pressure in a way. It makes me think of Brahms waiting to write his first symphony because of Beethoven's examples. But you have these examples of all these great storms of other composers, and you just dive right in, and it's a great piece. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's some special effects that you've asked for, such as with the percussion or with the strings and stuff like that. Do you want to mention any of the more unusual sounds that they might hear, or maybe you want to just let them be surprised?
I could mention a couple of them. Lots of shrieking and screaming. No.
Well, there's a lot of percussion.
That's probably going to be at the rehearsal. There are a couple things that I've used. There's to kind of evoke the rain kind of disappearing. I have the string players kind of randomly play on their own, each individual player playing these harmonics. So there are these high tones that kind of almost sound like glass-like is probably the best way to kind of describe it. And so it kind of sounds like this rain kind of trickling away, and slowly players are removed from the group, and so it dwindles down to just a single player at the very end. Another effect that I really like is you take a cymbal and you place it upside down on a timpani drum, and you sit there and roll the cymbal, and so you kind of get a little bit of your typical cymbal sound, but then at the same time the percussionist uses their foot and adjusts the timpani head, and so you get this kind of weird wind wave kind of effect going on. It's the first time I actually heard it was in a piece by one of my composition professors, and it took me a while to actually I was up in the balcony, and it took me a long time to actually pinpoint where that sound was coming from.
Yeah.
Because I kept looking in like the percussion section, but then I was like, okay, maybe it's a string thing, I don't know. And finally realized it's the timpani player sitting back there with the cymbal on the drum. And, it's just a really kind of bizarre, almost unearthly sound.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was one of the effects I saw in your band pieces when I was first looking at your scores, and we were just talking about you writing a piece. And I saw that. It was really cool. Well, like I said, it's such a special opportunity to have a living composer right here, and I wonder if there are any questions out there for Derek, either about the piece or about composition in general.
I don't have a question, but I want to tell you there was a tornado.
I guess we're canceling the piece.
1970.
I moved here in September and had it in the second week.
Oh, that doesn't count. That's in the county. That's in the county. There was one in East Dubuque. East Dubuque is different. Yeah. That's the Sin City of Dubuque anyway. I expect there to be a storm ahead. By the way, I forgot to introduce one of our players is here today, Connie Swift from our violin section. Welcome. Any other comments or questions for Derek? Oh yeah.
Perhaps I missed it, but did you have a primary instrument when you started?
My very first instrument was piano, and then I kind of jumped around. I think it's what eventually got me into composition. I never found an instrument that could keep my fancy that long. So I did piano, tried violin, was terrible at it. I did saxophone, bassoon, and then in high school, it was basically like whenever the conductor needed something, I was like, oh, I'll try to figure that out. So I played like contralto clarinet and euphonium and marching bands, and tried flute. But bassoon was kind of my main instrument. It was kind of I played it in the all-state orchestras and bands, and that was kind of the instrument that I was, I did almost, initially pursued a degree of bassoon performance. So, but yeah, I've kind of found though that I like being a little bit more behind the scenes. All my hard work's done when I arrive at the concert hall, which is kind of nice. So,
Yeah. Great. Yes.
Actually, a question for both of you. Is there an unusual dynamic being in the audience when your piece is played? And is there an unusual dynamic for you having the composer in the audience when you perform?
Yes.
If so, what are they?
Well, for me, pardon me for jumping in first, but it is a little nerve-wracking, but also kind of reassuring having the composer there. Normally, one of the great things about my job, as opposed to, like, for instance, my dynamic at home, is that I get to be in charge. When I'm on the podium, I really do have to be in charge and get to be in charge. But when there's a composer in the hall, I'm no longer in charge. It's really, oh, did I do that right? What can I do better? Is this what you imagined? How can I realize your vision? And so that is an extra challenge for me, but it's also a thrill. How about for you?
It doesn't matter if it's the world premiere of a piece or if it's like the 20th time it's been played. I have a death grip on the chair and or my fiance's arm through the entire performance. And it's not that I'm like worried that something's going to go wrong or anything. It's just you spend so much time like curled up in your office, staring at the computer screen and the piano next to you, and trying to create something that not only that you like, but that hopefully audience members will like or relate to, and so there's that kind of like almost worry, like, okay, like this is gonna finish and no one's gonna clap. Like they're just gonna be like, that was just awful. Like, what is going on? Was that even music? And I not that I ever think that would actually happen, but it's just this, it's almost like you're kind of pouring out your soul, but then you gave it to somebody else and then they're kind of relaying the information, so it's like a little game of telephone. So I'm not the direct person anymore. Like once the performers are playing it, I'm done. I have to just sit and be a spectator, and hopefully that, you know, my message through the, you know, the orchestra will come through. So it's kind of just a, you know, a nerve-wracking experience, you know, every time to hear a piece. And again, you know, I feel this way even if it's the 20th time the piece has been done.
Well, you said before that it's like your compositions are your children, and that's in a way very much like how Brahms felt and about his pieces too. And so when it's out there, I mean, you have a certain sort of parental kind of like fears and pride, and it's all kind of mixed in together, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like after a few years, I kind of that feeling kind of dissipates a little bit. So pieces that are like 5, 6, 7 years old now, I don't get that same way because it's like, oh, that one's grown up enough. Like they can kind of survive on their own.
Right.
So, but yeah, especially like, you know, like when it's like the first 3 or 4 years that a piece has existed, it's kind of nerve-wracking every time.
Sure. By the way, speaking of children, you have your parents here, don't you?
I do have my parents here.
Of course, in addition to your lovely fiancée.
I do.
So maybe you could just...
Yeah, so I have a great support system here with me. Got my parents, Joe and Sandy Jenkins, right over here. And then I've got my fiance sitting next to me at the table over here.
Well, we have time for one more question for Derek. Well, I don't know how to choose. We'll see if we can do them fast. Both.
Mine's quick.
Yeah.
So why isn't it Loris in the storm?
Why isn't it Loris in the storm? He chose Loris's first name, Matthias.
That explains it.
Yeah,
have to go any
Matthias Loris. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you defend, is the piece played and they listen to it, or do they pick it apart as you're defending?
So typically what happens, I have a tendency to be atypical, I guess, with my degree programs. Typically, you'd write the dissertation piece, it's defended, and then a premiere or a performance would happen later. Just how the stars aligned, I've actually written the piece, it's getting played, and then I defend it. So it's a little backwards now, kind of out of the norm. So it'll be nice, I'll be able to talk about the actual performance of the piece in the defense. But typically it's, the committee of 5 professors have just the score that they're looking at. They might have the terrible computer rendering of it, but it's
When you
not
say terrible computer rendering, you're talking about the sounds, the synthesized sounds from the computer, right?
Yeah, the synthesized sounds, the sounds that, we call it MIDI is the jargon term for that, but it's just kind of, what's supposed to sound like a violin kind of sort of resembles a violin, but it could also be like a cat.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with your dissertation defense, and thank you so much for writing the piece and being here. It's great to have you, and congrats.
Thank you.
There must be something in the Dubuque water, because there's so much musical talent coming out of Dubuque these days, and Derek is just a wonderful addition to the other composers who we've commissioned and other performers, singers, instrumentalists, and so forth. So it's very nice having you back, and congrats. I'd like to invite Robert Zimansky up to join me now, and we can talk about him and talk about the Bruch Scottish Fantasy. Please join me in welcoming Robert Zimansky. So, it's so wonderful to finally meet. You and I have had email conversations over the past maybe 2 years. And this weekend is the realization of a long plan to bring you back. And I had forgotten that you were actually here and had done the Brahms Concerto in 1988 until you reminded me last night.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us a little bit about your background and where you are now, and just a little bit more about you.
Okay, I'll try to make this brief. I was born in Iowa City, and as you heard earlier, my mother was born in Dubuque, and my older brother also. He'll be coming to the concert, actually both concerts. And I don't remember too much about Dubuque. Just visiting my grandfather, who had a house on Langworthy Street.
Wow.
This one.
There you go.
How's that?
Try again.
I can't hear.
Hold it close.
Hold it.
I can't hear a thing. Oh, that's what I was yeah, my grandfather had, well, first, actually, he first of all, he had this big mansion, right?
It's the Hoffman-Schneider Funeral Home on,
Yeah.
on Main Street, the big giant white one. And they just had a fresh coat of paint, I think in your honor. Yeah. Yeah. It's like 17th and Main, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think this house was built by some great-great-grandfather of mine called Robinson, which may be a Dubuque name, I don't know. But I think he really came over as a pioneer, basically, or I don't know how many generations back, and built this house already in the 19th century, I think.
Oh, wow.
I hope I have the story right. Anyway, my mother grew up in this house. And then the Depression came, and so they had my grandfather had to downsize a little bit. And that was Langworthy Street, Langworthy Avenue?
Yes.
Langworthy Street, yeah. I think it was number 1091. I have a memory for trivia like that. And, but as I say, maybe the last time I really hung around Dubuque as a kid, I was maybe 10 years old, maybe less. And actually, this is the third time I had played with the Dubuque Symphony.
Really?
Yes. If the Dubuque Symphony existed, now someone's got to help me here. When I was 15 years old, so that would be 1963, I won a young artist competition.
That's great.
And I played with a conductor with a Persian name,
Parviz Mahmood, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra. That's amazing. And that competition still exists today, our concerto competition, and it's actually taking place tomorrow afternoon. Maybe you want to judge. That's amazing. So you won the competition and you played with the symphony? Do you remember what piece it was?
Haydn C major concerto.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just thought that now, so this will be the third time.
Giant blocks of time in between, about 30 years span each time in between or something. Wow, that's so exciting.
And I'm getting older now, and that reminds me of a story of a pianist I know who played really quite well into his 90s. And he said when he was a kid, he said, boy, does he play well for his age. And now when he's 90, boy, does he play well. So, you know,
Well, you play fantastic, and speaking of fantasy, we have, as the title of the concert says, music and fantasy, we have this wonderful sort of fantasia for violin, harp, and orchestra, based on Scottish themes, and I'm so glad you suggested it. I don't mean to cut short your story about where you came from and where you are.
oh,
actually.
that's not.
No, well, tell them where you live now, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. Well, I lived in Iowa City till I was 18, went to University High School there, which doesn't exist anymore. And then I went to Juilliard in New York, and after Juilliard, so I was about 22, I moved to Europe permanently. I was concertmaster of a small orchestra in Munich, and then the Süddeutsche Rundfunk Orchestra in Stuttgart for a year.
Oh, well, that's the same orchestra I was the assistant of after college.
Yeah.
So that's fun. But
Now,
maybe
let
it's
me-
a little different. Yeah.
It is a little different,
Yeah, the
because in those
Süddeutsche,
days,
yeah.
the Süddeutsche, the radio orchestra, right?
Yeah.
The one Celli Badaki had.
Yeah, well, yeah. But when I was there, it was Michael Gielan. I was
Michael
the-
Gielan. I played with Michael
Yeah.
Gielan in the New York Philharmonic. That's not
Okay. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Tell us more. Go for it.
Well, the Süddeutsche Rundfunk Orchestra had, the South German radio had two orchestras in those days. One the symphony orchestra, and the other one did sort of light classics. We did mostly recordings, and I was sort of the young concertmaster of this orchestra, which they called, there was an A orchestra and a B orchestra. So I was concertmaster of the B orchestra. But it was fun because every day they put some music on our stands and we read through it. There was a wonderful Viennese conductor called Mathias, and he knew how to rehearse. And what he did is he read through, we had a 4-hour session to get this piece in the can.
In the can, meaning on recording.
Yeah.
So you'd put out a recording.
Yeah, and he'd start by reading the piece through, then he'd say, okay, wind players, go to the cafeteria. And said, come back in an hour. And then he'd work with the strings. He'd say, then the wind players would come back, he'd say, okay, string players, go to the cafeteria. come back in an hour. I said, well, actually an hour and 15 minutes because we have to take a break. And then about maybe 45 minutes before the end, he'd start recording. But it was so well rehearsed, we'd do it in 1 or 2 shots a few places, and they were good recordings.
That's great.
Anyway, I was only in this orchestra for 1 year because they made a merger. They merged the 2 orchestras together because it was kind of a luxury to have these 2 orchestras. And so I was there in the final season, and then I had to find another job. So I did, and I was the Orchestra de la Suisse Romande in Geneva. And I was concertmaster there from 1975 to 1999. And 24 years, that's a long time to stay in one place.
Yeah.
And, but it was a very interesting experience, of course. And all the time I had been teaching a little bit, but I decided one day it was time to spend more time for myself, teaching, and I'd have more freedom to do my own concerts. So I had a job as professor at the Geneva Conservatory and also the Hochschule in Zurich. And so I went back and forth. I've done a lot of commuting all my life. But when I left the orchestra, I lived in Zurich. And now I'm retired and I'm still playing lots of concerts, but I have no teaching obligations anymore. And I play lots of concerts. I'm concentrating on, well, concertos like this, the violin and piano. I have a piano quartet, which means violin, viola, cello, and piano, called the Amadeus Piano Quartet, which is doing quite well now. And these are with friends of mine from the Orchestra de la Suisse Romande, so I go down to Geneva and see them. It's a lot of fun. And I have an octet called Via Corda, and Monica is a viola player in the octet. She's here to join me. And we play the Schubert octet and the Beethoven septet and anything which mixes strings and wind instruments and chambers.
Wonderful. That's so great. Well, so now, I don't remember what you told me the last time you may have been in Dubuque, but have you noticed that Dubuque has changed a lot from the times that you've been here when you've come back? Because there have been this development on the river and everything else.
Well, of course, I haven't really got time to see anything else except the hotel and the concert hall.
Yeah, right. I need to take you around.
Yeah, sometime when this is all over.
Yeah, right.
But no, I think the downtown area is exactly the same, isn't it?
Well, a lot of the buildings have been restored, but yeah.
Oh, so,
Yeah.
I think I think it is a compliment. I think they're very charming buildings, and I like restoring buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. So now tell us about this piece. It is a special piece and unfortunately not played as often as it really should be, the Bruch Scottish Fantasy. Bruch was inspired by folk songs, and there's a famous quote of his saying that a great folk song is better than 1,000 of my own original melodies, because it's been handed down from generation to generation and time tested. So he took a collection of folk songs, right? And Scotland and Scottish folklore and stories and music was extremely exotic, I think, at this time in the 1800s. And that was the inspiration for this piece. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with it and what your impressions of it are.
Well, Bruch was obviously interested in Scotland and Scottish folk music, although he had never visited the country. And the story goes is that he found these Scottish folk songs in a library in Munich. But I think he chose quite good ones.
He chose really well, yeah.
They're quite touching, I think. They have very funny Scottish titles, which I can't pronounce. They're very strange.
Yeah, I'm not going to attempt, but yeah. But like old Rob Morris and Scots Wahey and things like that.
Yeah, that's
Some
right.
of them are very actually famous. There was one, the basis of the finale is a song that was sung during an infamous battle in the year 1314 when there were, what was it, I think there was 10,000 Scots and they defeated 23,000 others. And that was like one of their battle cries.
This was their battle cry.
Yeah.
The last movement is titled Allegro Guerriero, meaning like a warlike Allegro. So
the only
that's
other
what
piece
this
that
military-
has a title like that is Mendelssohn's Scottish Symphony. So he must have been inspired by Mendelssohn, who did go to Scotland.
Mendelssohn did go to Scotland.
Was the Hebrides Overture as well. So yeah, so it's a beautiful sort of rhapsody for you, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
It's a gorgeous sort of playing of these Scottish folk songs. And when you think of Scottish music, you don't necessarily think of the violin. Obviously, there's another famous Scottish instrument which shall remain nameless.
I think we're going to spill the beans.
Well,
Yeah.
we're not talking about the bagpipes. Actually, yeah, no, there are no bagpipes, but there's an emulation of a drone of a bagpipe in this piece played by the orchestra. But the other instrument that really has a huge prominent part is the harp. And of course, maybe people will think of an Irish as being an Irish instrument, but I think equally important in Scotland, perhaps. So there's a big part for the harp, and you'll notice that the harp this weekend is right up front with Robert. They're both featured lovely, in a lovely way.
Well, that's one of the things I really like about this piece is how beautifully Bruch writes for the instruments. Not only the solo violin, which is very natural and really brings out the best colors of the violin, and doesn't write anything. It's difficult, but it's not stupidly difficult. It's not unnecessarily difficult. It's worth the work. And the other thing is the orchestration. The orchestration, I think, is just fascinating. Very, very colorful and beautiful use of the harp and wind instruments, and cello melodies.
The cello melodies are really special, yeah.
He was a good craftsman.
He was.
Yeah.
The piece starts in a really mysterious and wonderful way that just sort of brings you into the idea that he's trying to sort of recreate the times of old. He said it's as if there's an old bard, say, reminiscing or having a nostalgia about maybe the older days of Scottish clans and so forth. I could play a little bit of that opening. And
Yeah.
hear that. No, actually not. I'm sorry, I don't have it on this right now. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll have to hear it this weekend. But it does really sort of set the stage for something special. And it's unusual that this concerto is not called a concerto. It's called a fantasy, and it has a different structure than you would normally
Yeah, I think it's a
anticipate.
question of form.
Yeah.
If you call a concerto something else, because it really is a violin concerto.
It
But I
is.
think it's something about the form. It's not really a sonata form with a theme and the development section coming back to the theme. I think that's
Yeah,
all.
and it doesn't have the traditional fast, slow, fast three-movement structure of a traditional concerto. And there are many examples of aberrations of that within the concerto repertoire, but this one is special too, because that introduction, the first notes that you hear, are particularly slow and just really draw you into the sort of mood of the
It's
piece.
a dirge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more grave for the tempo. Yeah, it's
Very sad.
It is,
Yeah.
and then that changes, and the minor shifts to major in the opening of the first movement proper. It's beautiful.
And then you hear the first Scottish theme when the minor, the sad music becomes more joyful and just full of heart. That's a wonderful moment. That's the first of the Scottish themes. And then there's a fast movement. That's Rob, what's it called?
Rob Morris, is that it?
Old Rob Morris, yeah.
Yeah. It's
That's-
a dance.
That's a dance, and that's where you hear the bagpipes a little bit, and the cellos and basses just playing the same notes over and over again. That's quite jolly. And then there's a lovely slow movement where the harp comes back, and maybe that's my favorite part.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
gorgeous. The way you play it is just beautiful. Yeah. And then the finale, like we said before, has this sort of warlike theme, but it's really a celebration, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
It's
Yeah.
very much of a celebration. The war is over, actually, when the piece starts, it seems like.
Yeah, I think the war is over.
Yeah.
Not for me, but
Well, there's a lot of work yet for the violin in that last movement. He gives you some tricks, doesn't he, in that last movement?
yeah, it's quite difficult. And he takes the theme and writes variations on it, which are quite spectacular. And then the piece gets more and more romantic. This last movement also has some very nice Scottish themes in the middle, which he repeats several times, which I think is quite reassuring. If you hear a nice melody, it's nice to hear it again. And then the piece gets slower and slower, and sadder, more beautiful, and then And it ends.
It ends up beat again.
It ends up
Yes.
beat again, yeah.
Now, you may not be as familiar with the name Max Bruch as you are with the name Brahms, but you might recall that he has a beautiful first violin concerto. There's a piece of his Kol Nidre, which is an absolutely gorgeous
Shlomo,
piece, the Shlomo. There are several other pieces of Bruch, but you know, it's again, like the Scottish Fantasy, often not played as often as it should be. It's great, great music. And he comes as one of the late romantics, and I really find that he must really adore a great melody. That's one of the things that's special about Bruch. And then the way he treats the melodies and can come up with different voicings of it, like we're talking about, the color combinations with the orchestra are really special in this piece.
Yeah, I wanted to add, just to go on with that. Bruch apparently was very jealous of Brahms. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
And when he wrote his third concerto, which is almost never done, he was trying to write a piece, just as imposing as the Brahms violin concerto, which is a big piece. And I would say he didn't quite make it.
Yeah. I didn't know that there was a sense of rivalry.
Yeah, I think he was quite, he wasn't as nice a man as you would think. The sound of his music.
Yeah, the music is really lovely.
But wonderful melodies.
Yeah, gorgeous. Anything else you want to share about the piece?
What else could we say? I think we've covered it.
Yeah, we have. Do you guys have questions for Robert?
Have you ever thought of doing anything with the wonderful verbal resonance that you have?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, but
This is a question from one of our opera lovers who's wondering if Robert's voice has ever been used musically.
Even speaking.
Or speaking, yeah.
Or, yes.
Should be on the radio.
well, that's a funny story because once, no, I never was interested in thinking. I do love opera. I'm a big opera fan. But once I was rehearsing with a pianist in France who does a lot of opera accompanying, and we were playing a Brahms sonata, and she said, why, you really should develop your voice. You should study singing. You have a great voice. I said, yeah, but I've got enough to do with the violin. He says, but don't you realize that if you sang the doctor who comes in at the last act of La Traviata and sings basically Violetta is going to die in the next 5 minutes and then goes off stage, you would earn more money than if you played the Brahms violin. And she's right, but money isn't everything.
Would you like to tell us anything about your instrument?
Yes, this is a Storione, which I bought in Iowa City actually. It was built in 1780. It's quite an old instrument, and I'm very happy with it because it has a very full sound on all 4 strings. There are many instruments which have one string that sounds really fantastic, and then the next one is a little bit different, and there's always a few places maybe low on the A string, it doesn't sound so good, but up high on the A string, it's okay. And this is absolutely perfect. It really goes from one string to another. So when I play a scale from bottom to top, you really don't feel any break in the sound. But mostly it's a very full sound, and it's a pleasure to play.
Would you be willing to play a little bit for us? Maybe some of the themes from the Scottish Fantasy?
Oh, that'd be
great. While you do, I want to just mention again, Robert and pianist Sharon Jensen will perform the Grieg Third Sonata at the library Sunday, as I mentioned before. And I wanted to thank John and Alice Butler. Alice is here today. I wanted to thank them for sponsoring that performance at the library, the recital at the library. Thank you, Alice. I think you can just call the Symphony office, and if you're looking for the number, on the very back of your program notes, there's an ad for, I think it's a league event, and the number is right at the bottom. Yes. Great. So you say this is a Storione from 1780.
Yeah.
Wow. And what about, is your bow something special you want to mention as well?
Yeah. You know why? You know why Monica's laughing?
Why?
Is that this is her bow.
So you must be love if you're sharing.
No, but I don't know why everybody's laughing. That's not so funny. But what's funny is there are tremendous problems taking
Oh yeah.
musical instruments and bows into the country, getting through immigration because of animal rights groups. Because everything has, actually including this bow, I think this is fishbone or something.
There's a little bit of fishbone, and of
Yeah.
course at the tip
Yeah.
It's
is
nothing.
no ivory.
Yeah.
Amazingly, no ivory.
And that's why
you're
we
using this
thought
one.
this, because we said we can't risk taking a good bow into the United States because somebody, it just takes one person who's in a bad mood that day, and they'll say, what about that ivory there? And then they'll take your bow and shred it.
Oh, and bows, can be quite important and pricey. I mean, it's not unusual for a fine bow to be $15,000 or something. So they'll just take it and that's it. You won't get it back, just because of the ivory that's at the tip of almost every bow. So you chose this because it doesn't have ivory.
Right,
Well,
and
that's
it's
a good story.
it's very similar to the bow which I use, and I'm actually quite comfortable with it. It's a very good bow. But what is it?
Nothing.
It's that no name brand. I'm just kidding. I'm sure it is something, but
Robert Kühne. Kühne. Robert Kühne.
Robert Kuhn.
wonderful. Well, do you want to demonstrate a little
Okay, I can
Scottish
try.
melodies?
I thought maybe just the way the Scottish fantasy begins with this very sad melody. The opening is quite beautiful. Sets the atmosphere for the piece.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So after that atmospheric introduction, we get something with
Then there's the first Scottish theme goes like this.
Yeah, it doesn't just make you smile like it does. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And he writes a lot of these melodies in double stop, so I have to play two voices at the same time.
Right. Do you want to do a little of the dance music?
Yeah,
the dance
then here's the dance theme with the bagpipes.
Maybe a little bit of the finale or the slow movement?
The slow movement is this swing move. Could you show that one?
Beautiful. The characteristic Scotch snap at the end of that body. Yeah, that's great. That's one of the things that really makes it seem Scottish, that little body. Yeah, exactly. Great.
And then the last movement is this is the warlike
The
theme.
warlike theme, yeah, but it's actually not really warlike, is it? Yeah. so special, isn't it? Bravo. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been lovely to get to know you, and I'm so glad that you could be here and reconnect with people who feel like you are a native son, even though you grew up in Iowa City. So, thank you for sharing your musical talent with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You wait till you hear him play this piece. It's just gorgeous. Thank you, Robert. So I didn't get enough time to talk about Brahms, but if you're coming on Sunday, you can come to my pre-concert lecture where I'll talk more about Brahms there. Just briefly, Brahms' Third Symphony is a gorgeous piece that shows a sort of more reflective side of the composer. He's sort of it seems to me like, even though this music doesn't have an outside program and it's not about anything specifically, it seems to me that it's really about like life experience. It's about Brahms looking back, and there are some moments of regret and nostalgia, but there's some also moments where he's looking back in almost like a childlike way to earlier times that were very happy too. The piece is unusual in that each of the four movements ends quietly. It has a very mellow kind of autumnal feel to it in this symphony. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be excitement and there's going to be some fierce battles along the way, but I feel like they're all, in a way, sort of almost reminiscences of that. There's a motif that you hear right at the beginning, a sort of ascent from the note F to the note A, and then again to an F. And musicologists have noted that that's really the musical motto for Brahms, F-A-F, standing for frei aber froh, free but happy. And with his friend, the violinist Joseph Joachim, they developed these little mottos earlier, and Joachim, before he was married, had his own motto, which was F-A-E, frei aber einsam. So he was free, but he was lonely, and he got married. Brahms was a lifelong bachelor, and I mention all this because you mentioned the motto, free but happy. Many musicologists and program notes will talk about that motto in this piece, but really, there's a lot about this symphony that is not an expression of joy. It's more like, I've chosen this life. I've chosen to be a bachelor. And not coincidentally, he met and sort of had feelings for a young contralto, Hermina Spies, right at the time that he was writing this piece in Wiesbaden. And so he, nothing happened with that relationship, but I think he had this, longing that is expressed in this symphony, particularly in the third movement, which is an absolutely gorgeous melody, full of melancholy and nostalgia. The second movement introduces, in a really prominent way, even in the first movement too, in the second theme, the clarinet, which was one of Brahms' favorite instruments, and which will have an important part in this symphony as it goes forward, and there's a melody that it's going to state that almost sounds otherworldly. It's like coming from some other deeper place. That melody in the second movement will appear again in the fourth movement and lead ultimately to sort of a triumphant moment. So the piece is, in characteristic Brahms fashion, it ties together themes and craftsmanship of working out melodies in incredibly ingenious ways. And it doesn't have a specific program, but it has all this emotion just packed in there. So from a musical standpoint, academically, yes, every melody and motif is built on a variation of itself in incredibly organic forms that tie together in ways that are astounding intellectually. But the emotions and the feelings behind the music are what I think bring us back to Brahms over and over again. It's powerful music, and it affects us in a deep, heartfelt way. So we hope you'll enjoy the whole concert. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Thank you to the Symphony League for hosting these all season long. Thank you for so many of you who've come all season long to the Soundbites, and we hope that you'll enjoy the concert this weekend. Have a good afternoon.